He said I was money hungry, but he hid $700,000 in crypto. That line hit hard, not just because he said it, but because he said it to the judge. He stood there, in his wrinkled shirt, fake tears in his eyes, claiming he was broke, claiming I was trying to bleed him dry. And for a second I saw the courtroom believe him. Their silence, their glances, the doubt creeping in. But I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just reached into my folder and handed over the receipts, screenshots of his secret wallet, his LLC, every crypto transfer, every hidden coin. He lied under oath, and I brought the IRS to family court. I used to believe Jason was the kind of man who would never lie to me. Not the flashy type, not loud, not the kind who bought things just to impress people. He was safe, stable, a guy who wore the same worn-out boots to every holiday dinner and never forgot to refill the gas before giving the car back. We met in a boring way at a networking event in Boise for small business owners. He ran a modest print shop. I was doing freelance bookkeeping. He made me laugh. I made him feel seen. By the time he proposed, I had no doubts. The wedding was small, just close friends and some leftover cake from Costco. We didn't have much, but I told myself we had enough. For the first couple of years, things were normal, nothing glamorous, but full of late-night takeout, walks around Camel's Back Park, and Jason whispering, "One day, I'll give you more." I worked 2 jobs doing taxes by day and waiting tables by night while he struggled to keep the print business alive. Every time he came home empty-handed, he'd hold me close and say, "I'll make it up to you." I held on to those words. I believed him. Then came the baby, our daughter, Isla. When I told him I was pregnant, he looked shocked, not unhappy, but like someone who had just remembered they left the oven on. He hugged me, kissed me, promised me he'd figure things out, and for a while, I thought he was trying. He said he wanted to start something new, something online, something with long-term potential. He asked to borrow from our joint savings. I didn't hesitate. It was his money, too. Right. He withdrew $18,000, then $7,000 more from my old 401k. He said it was a one-time thing, said he'd triple it in no time. I never saw that money again. But I didn't fight him. I told myself marriage is about faith and sacrifice. The print shop closed a few months later. He said it wasn't profitable, that the industry was dying. He wanted to go all in on crypto. Crypto, a word I barely understood. He told me to relax, that it wasn't gambling, it was the future. He said he'd make us millionaires by the time Isla turned 5. I was too exhausted to argue. I had stretch marks, cracked nipples, a part-time job, and barely 6 hours of sleep a week. Jason, meanwhile, started spending more time at coffee shops with his laptop. He said he needed fast Wi-Fi and focus. Some nights he wouldn't come home until after 2 a.m. He'd blame meetups, live streams, or market volatility. And every time I asked if we were okay financially, he said, "Don't worry, just trust me." So I did, until I couldn't anymore. It started with the silence. He stopped talking to Isla, stopped asking about my day. His phone, once left on the counter, was always in his pocket, face down, locked. Then came the fights, the accusations. He said I was too negative, that I was dragging him down, and one night, after I found a hotel receipt in his coat pocket, he looked me in the eye and said, "It's not what you think." But it was. The woman's name was Kylie. She was a bartender at the crypto convention he swore he couldn't miss. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just stared at him and knew it was over. I filed for divorce the next week. I thought it would be simple. I thought, after everything I gave, he'd at least be fair. But when he submitted his financial disclosure, it said, no income, no savings, no assets. He even checked the box for needs spousal support. He claimed I was the breadwinner. I remember sitting in my lawyer's office, hands shaking. She looked at me and said, "Do you think he's hiding money?" And in that moment, I heard his voice again. Just trust me. But trust is for people who tell the truth. And I was about to dig for mine. The first time I saw Jason cry in court, I almost believed him myself. He was that convincing, wearing a suit one size too big, no tie, hair undone like he hadn't slept in days. He sniffled, looked down at the table, muttered, "I'm struggling." And the judge, she leaned in, her eyes softened. Jason Mitchell, the man who used to toss crypto jargon at me like confetti, now sat there claiming to be broke, no assets, no income, nothing to his name but a few shirts and a car that hadn't passed emissions. I watched it all, silent still. My lawyer squeezed my arm under the table, a warning, don't react, so I didn't. I just stared at Jason like I was looking at a stranger. Because that's who he was now, a man capable of lying under oath with tears. He handed in his financial affidavit that morning, swore he had no income in the last fiscal year, no investments, no business dealings. The judge looked at me then. Her voice was even. "Ms. Mitchell, you're the primary custodian of your daughter." "Yes." I nodded. "Are you able to support her without contribution from your ex-spouse?" I hesitated. Not because I couldn't, but because I'd already been carrying the weight of 2 lives for 7 years. And now, he wanted to vanish from responsibility without even a ripple. I answered, "But I don't think I should have to." Jason's lawyer objected, something about tone, but I didn't flinch. See, this wasn't just about money. It was about how cleanly he thought he could walk away, how easily he thought he could erase his name from a spreadsheet and pretend it all never existed. I had a mortgage, rent on an office, therapy bills, grocery receipts, and 3 years' worth of expenses he never once asked about, and now he stood there, acting like he barely had enough to feed himself. But I knew better, because Jason made one fatal mistake. He underestimated the girl who used to balance books for a living. He forgot that I see patterns, that I notice holes, that I don't forget numbers. So while he was printing pity, I was printing paper trails. It started with a credit card charge, a random monthly debit from a platform I'd never used Cloud Mint Secure. When I searched it online, it linked back to a cold wallet subscription. From there, I found 3 more charges linked to digital storage vaults. The email on one of them, J. Mitch, cryptoerwin@protonmail.com. He never used that email with me. But Google is generous when you know where to look. And once I traced one transaction to a public key, the rest unraveled like a thread from a cheap suit. There were wallets, transactions, exchanges in the middle of the night. I started logging everything, block by block, ledger by ledger. At night, after putting Isla to bed, I'd sit in my robe, hair tied up, deciphering a digital life Jason never told me about. He was moving money, using alias accounts, routing funds through his college buddy's LLC, all while telling the court he had nothing. I didn't confront him. I didn't even tell my lawyer, not at first, because I needed more. I needed enough to paint the whole picture. So I did what he never expected. I logged into our old shared Google Drive. He forgot I still had access. Inside, I found spreadsheets, actual sheets titled Holdings, Market Watch, and my personal favorite, Future Island Money. He'd documented everything, even projected growth. Over 700,000 hiding in wallets and sitting in Ethereum, Bitcoin, and something called Solana. He had charts, he had goals, he even had an exit plan, and none of it included Isla or me. The day after court, I printed every file, compiled it into a black folder. Then I called a friend at the IRS. We weren't best friends, just enough of a connection to ask if someone is hiding crypto and didn't disclose it in a divorce. Is that perjury? She paused, then said, "If you can prove it, yes, and tax evasion too." That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight Jason with emotion. I was going to fight him with documentation. Because while he was busy pretending to be a victim, I was becoming the storm he didn't see coming. So I started preparing, not for a fight, but for a reckoning. I gathered everything: dates, dollar amounts, wallet IDs, emails, burner accounts. I even had a screenshot of Jason bragging about his crypto wins in a Reddit thread under the username GemHunter83. He thought no one would ever trace it. But he forgot one thing: nothing on the internet ever really disappears. The next court hearing was 2 weeks away. In those 2 weeks, I lived like a shadow. Quiet, focused, invisible. Every time I saw him at drop-offs, pickups, I smiled, polite, distant. Not a hint of what I was building. Jason started to let his guard down again. He thought the worst was behind him. He even texted me once, "Hope you're healing. I'm praying for peace." Peace. He wanted peace while planning to walk away with nearly $1 million buried in a blockchain graveyard. I replied, "Thanks. Wishing you clarity too," because clarity was coming, and it would arrive in a binder with tabs. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was doing too much, if I'd gone too far. But then I remembered Isla's tiny shoes by the door, her drawings taped to the fridge, and how Jason hadn't sent a single dime in 3 months. This wasn't vengeance, this was protection. I got out of bed, double-checked the folder, and added one last thing: a picture of Isla with the caption she wrote in crayon, "Me and Mommy safe." I wanted the court to see what was really at stake. The next morning, I wore black. Not because I was mourning, but because I was coming for truth. Jason walked in late. Same pitiful look, same cheap performance. His lawyer smirked like they'd already won. They had no idea what I was carrying in my hands. And when the judge asked if there were any additional disclosures to present, I stood, not shaking, not afraid. I handed the folder to the clerk. Jason watched it move from my fingers to the bench. I watched the color drain from his face as the first page was flipped. Page after page, receipt after receipt. His digital double life, printed in black and white. The courtroom didn't gasp. They didn't need to. The silence was louder than shock. And in that silence, Jason broke character. His face twisted. He leaned forward, whispering urgently to his lawyer. But it was too late. Because numbers don't lie, but he did. And now, the court knew it too. The silence in that courtroom was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. The kind of silence that carries weight, like the hush before a storm breaks loose. Jason's eyes flicked from the folder to the judge to me, back and forth, fast, like he was trying to outrun what was already unfolding. But there's no outrunning the truth. The judge adjusted her glasses slowly, taking her time. She didn't speak for a full 30 seconds, just turned each page of the evidence I'd submitted. Her expression unreadable. Jason's lawyer shifted uncomfortably, whispering to him with increasing urgency, but Jason didn't respond. He just stared ahead, lips parted, sweating. My lawyer didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The documents were speaking loud enough. Every wallet transaction, every hidden asset, the fake LLC named after his college dog, the crypto withdrawals on nights he told me he was working late. He'd built a financial empire in the shadows, and he thought I wouldn't find it. The judge finally looked up. "Mr. Mitchell, are you prepared to explain these documents?" Jason opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Then he cleared his throat. Tried again. I wasn't trying to hide anything. I didn't think they were relevant. Relevant. That's what he said. As if hundreds of thousands of dollars, as if a financial network designed to avoid tax and court detection was just irrelevant. The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She just said, "Mr. Mitchell, do you understand what perjury means?" Jason looked like a man whose parachute just failed. My lawyer asked to approach the bench. Jason's team followed. I stayed seated, calm, composed, watching the weight of Jason's lies land one by one. It was poetic. For once, I didn't have to argue. I didn't have to defend myself. All I had to do was tell the truth and let it sit in the light. When they returned, the judge announced that a forensic accountant would be appointed to audit Jason's financials. That until then, all court decisions would be paused. Jason's lawyer protested, claimed it was excessive. The judge shut it down. "If your client is innocent, he has nothing to fear," she said. It was the first time I saw Jason truly panic. Not the performative tears, but real fear. He ran his hands through his hair, shook his head like a child caught cheating. The hearing adjourned, but the war had just begun. In the days that followed, Jason tried calling me 4 times, left 2 voicemails, both saying the same thing: we don't have to do this. But we did because he already had. I didn't answer, didn't text back. I focused on Isla. I took her to school, made pancakes with blueberries, watched cartoons on Sunday mornings while the world outside was burning. The accountant subpoenaed Jason's full banking history, his crypto wallets, his LLC filings, even PayPal and Venmo, everything. And what they found made my evidence look like the tip of an iceberg. Jason had funneled funds through not one, but our 3 separate shell companies, one in Nevada, one registered to a cousin in Oregon, and one in Panama. This wasn't just about hiding money from his ex-wife. This was federal. The accountant filed a report. The IRS got wind. And suddenly, family court wasn't the only courtroom Jason had to worry about. I got a call from the state attorney's office asking if I'd be willing to testify. I said yes, because I wanted the truth to echo. I wanted my daughter to grow up knowing that silence isn't weakness, that being underestimated is a weapon. At the next family hearing, Jason showed up with a new lawyer, gray suit, stoic expression. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't need to. I had already won the battle he never saw coming. The judge ruled in my favor on every count: full custody, back child support, a portion of the hidden assets legally transferred into a trust for Isla. Jason tried to appeal. It was denied. He walked out that day with his shoulders low, still pretending to be the victim. But everyone saw through it now. Even his own attorney didn't bother to shake his hand. I walked out holding a folder, not because I needed more evidence, but because I'd learned something powerful. Truth isn't loud. Justice doesn't always wear armor. Sometimes it just wears heels and carries receipts. I didn't gloat. There were no dramatic exits. No looks over the shoulder, just me, breathing for the first time in years, like the weight of his secrets had been sitting on my lungs. And finally, I could exhale. Outside the courthouse, I called Isla's school, told them I'd be late for pickup, but wanted to bring her ice cream, because some days you win a war in silence, and the reward is a soft-serve swirl with sprinkles. I sat in my car for 10 minutes, just gripping the wheel, not crying, not shaking, just still. Jason always said I was too emotional, that I let things get to me. He never understood that feeling deeply doesn't make you weak. It makes you dangerous to liars. Later that week, a letter came in the mail, from Jason, handwritten, no envelope, just folded and shoved into the mailbox like a bad memory. He wrote that he never meant for things to go this far, that he felt cornered and ashamed, that he hoped one day Isla would forgive him. I didn't reply, because forgiveness isn't something you get to request on paper. It's something you earn, and Jason, he hadn't even started that journey. Instead, I focused on building our life. I upgraded my office, started taking fewer clients, spending more time with Isla. Our home got quieter, but also safer. One night, Isla asked me, "Mommy, are we going to be okay now?" I kissed her forehead and whispered, "We already are." Because sometimes, justice isn't loud. Sometimes, it looks like bedtime stories and soft pajamas, like a woman sitting at a kitchen table, filing forms not for revenge, but for truth. And if Jason ever wonders how he lost everything, the answer is simple. He thought I wouldn't fight, but I did. Quietly, strategically, with every transaction, every ledger, every receipt. He hid his income, but I brought the storm. Courtroom 4, Wednesday, 9:00 a.m. That was the moment everything changed. I walked in alone, no entourage, no one holding my hand, just me and a folder, same one I'd been carrying for weeks, except this time, it wasn't just about evidence. It was a declaration that I would not be erased. Jason was already there, sitting stiff in his chair. He looked smaller somehow, like the lies had started to weigh him down. His new lawyer, a white-haired man with sharp eyes, whispered something to him. Jason didn't respond. I sat down, breathed in, counted to 4. There's power in stillness, especially when the person across from you expects collapse. The bailiff announced the judge's entrance, and the room rose. I stood with both feet planted like I belonged there. Because I did. The judge wasted no time. She began with the forensic audit summary. She read aloud line after line of Jason's concealed funds, hidden transfers, fabricated expenses, each one struck like a drumbeat, steady, unforgiving. Jason didn't blink, just sat there, jaw clenched, as if ignoring it would make it all disappear. But this wasn't his fantasy world anymore. This was court, and court doesn't run on emotion. It runs on evidence. My lawyer stood to speak. Her voice was steady, almost gentle, but her words were sharp. She laid out the years of labor I had carried on my back, the financial burden, the parenting, the silence. She told the court I had never tried to destroy Jason only to uncover the truth. My client doesn't want revenge, she said. She wants restoration. That word stayed with me. Restoration. Not power, not punishment. Just a return to what was right, to what was fair. Then the judge turned to me. Ms. Mitchell, would you like to speak? I rose. My hands weren't shaking this time. Yes, Your Honor. I didn't prepare a speech. I didn't need one. I just told the truth. How I stood by Jason during every promise he broke. How I worked night shifts while he gambled with our savings in digital roulette. How I asked for transparency, not profit. And how he gave me betrayal instead of answers. I looked directly at him, and I said, "You didn't just lie to the court. You lied to your daughter. You lied to me. But worst of all, you lied to yourself about the kind of man you are." He looked away, and that silence, it said more than any apology ever could. When I sat down, my knees locked for a moment. I exhaled. I didn't cry. The judge nodded. Then she spoke the verdict. Jason Mitchell was found to have committed financial fraud and perjury. He would be fined, sanctioned, and referred to the IRS for further investigation. His visitation rights would be supervised until further review. I would retain full custody. And the remaining funds in his concealed assets would be frozen until restitution was arranged. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the acknowledgement. The validation that I hadn't imagined the manipulation, that my instinct was right. I walked out of that courtroom and didn't look back. Outside, the air hit me like something holy. It was crisp, cold, real. Jason stayed behind, tangled in paperwork and shame. I stepped into the sunlight, free. Later that night, Isla asked me what happened. I didn't tell her all the legal details. I just said, "Mommy stood up for us." And the truth won. She smiled and hugged me. And in that hug, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. Over the next few weeks, people started reaching out. Women from support groups, old friends, even quiet coworkers who had watched from the sidelines. They said I was brave, that I'd inspired them. But I didn't feel brave. I felt necessary. Like telling the truth should never be exceptional. It should be expected. One woman messaged me, "Thank you for showing that silence isn't surrender. It's strategy." And I held on to that, because that was what Jason never understood. He thought silence meant weakness. That if I wasn't yelling, I must be breaking. But the truth is, I was building, brick by brick, case by case, until the day I could bring it all down on him. In the weeks that followed, I transferred funds into Isla's trust. I rewrote my will. I restructured my business to give single mothers priority hiring, because I wasn't just rebuilding for me. I was building for every woman who's been told to sit down, to be quiet, to stay small. I bought new locks, painted the kitchen, hung up the first photo of Isla and me smiling that didn't feel forced. Healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the sound of a drawer closing on old paperwork, or a key turning in a new door. That night, I stood in front of the mirror, no makeup, no mask, and I said aloud, "You were right to believe in yourself." Because in a world that tried to tell me I was overreacting, emotional, unstable, I stayed steady. I stayed strategic. And when the time came, I didn't scream. I handed over the truth. Months passed. The noise faded. The headlines disappeared. The attorneys moved on to other cases. But I remembered everything. Every courtroom breath. Every shaky night. Every moment I doubted myself. And kept going anyway. There's a strange stillness that comes after justice, like standing on the shore after a storm. You know the waves tried to drown you, but you're still there. Dripping. Changed. But standing. Jason's name still shows up sometimes. On court letters, on tax documents, on custody scheduling apps. But it no longer tightens my chest. It no longer owns space in my mind. Because the man who thought he could hide everything couldn't hide from the woman who saw through everything. Somewhere, Jason is probably still spinning stories, telling people I blindsided him, that I was cruel, that I went too far. Let him. Because I don't owe anyone the soft version of this story. I don't need to fold the truth to make others more comfortable. I lived it, and I earned the ending, one built not on rage, but on receipts, not on yelling, but on facts. Now, every time I walk past my front door, I see a sticky note Isla left taped to the wall. It says, in her crooked handwriting, "You are the strongest girl in the world." And I believe her. Part 5. He hid his income. But I brought receipts to court revenge never came the way I imagined it would. There were no headlines, no public meltdowns, no final shouting match in a parking lot. No one handed me a gold medal for surviving. But that's the thing about real victory. It doesn't scream. It settles. Like dust on a courtroom bench. Like peace under your skin. 3 months after the final hearing, life looked ordinary again. But everything inside me had changed. I started smiling with my eyes again. Not for photos, but for Isla. She began sleeping through the night without asking. Will Daddy be mad if I spill something that alone? Felt like justice. I redecorated the living room. New curtains. Soft gray walls. Plants by the window. I lit candles again. Because no one was there to blow them out and say they gave him headaches. The house wasn't just quieter, it was safer. I laughed louder. I cooked slower. I existed freely. And that freedom, it cost me everything I once thought I needed. Jason's life, on the other hand, began to shrink. The IRS froze more of his assets. His crypto accounts flagged for audit. His reputation in the startup circles he used to brag about gone. Apparently, people don't like working with men who lie to judges. He moved out of his rental, started crashing with a cousin, tried filing an appeal for reduced fines. Denied. I didn't rejoice in any of it. I didn't post about it. Didn't call anyone to celebrate. Because this wasn't about watching him fall. It was about knowing he couldn't pretend anymore. The mask was gone and the story had cracked, and for once, I wasn't the one left explaining myself. One Friday, I got a call from his lawyer. He wanted to propose a settlement, an early buyout to avoid further court involvement. I listened. Let him finish. Then I said, "Put it in writing." It arrived in a manila envelope 2 days later. A check. A letter. A signature. His final admission that I had been right. I deposited the money straight into Isla's education fund. Every cent. And I didn't text him to say thank you, because it wasn't a gift. It was overdue. Sometimes people ask me why I never went public, why I didn't expose him or share the documents online. But I didn't need to. The truth did the work for me. Besides, there's something infinitely more satisfying than viral attention silence. Knowing he has to live with the knowledge that I didn't break, I built. I rebuilt my business, took on new clients, taught workshops, hired a receptionist named Kendra who had gone through her own divorce. We laughed about how women are taught to make themselves small to keep a man's pride alive. We decided we were done shrinking. Isla's school had a family day. She drew a picture of me holding a briefcase with a heart on it. Underneath, she wrote, "My mom helps people and never lies." I stared at that crayon masterpiece longer than any legal document I ever touched. It was the only testimony I needed. Jason sends birthday cards now. Signed love. Dad in handwriting that feels too neat to be sincere. I let Isla read them. Let her choose if she wants to reply. Because control isn't the goal. Clarity is. I tell her the truth, in age-appropriate doses. Not because I want her to resent him, but because I want her to recognize red flags early. I want her to know that love without honesty is just manipulation in costume. Sometimes she asks, "Will you ever marry again?" I smile and say, "Maybe, but only if he never makes me question my worth." Because that's the new rule. If I have to shrink, silence, or disappear to be loved, it isn't love. It's erasure. This story doesn't end with Jason's punishment. It ends with my peace. The kind of peace that comes when you stare down a system built to ignore you and force it to listen. It comes when you walk into court with nothing but a folder and leave with everything you were told you didn't deserve. It comes when you stop waiting for someone to save you because you realize you are the storm. And that's the part no one sees. Not the court transcripts. Not the affidavits. Not the months of quiet. Of planning. Of holding your breath while the world tells you to just move on. I didn't move on, I moved through. Through doubt, through judgment, through every eye roll and backhanded comment that said, "She's just bitter." No, I was awake. I was wide awake in a world that tried to gaslight me into sleeping through my own erasure. But I refused. And now I sleep better than I have in years. Because I know I didn't need revenge to win. I needed clarity. And I got it on paper. In court. In my daughter's eyes. There's something sacred about silence after survival. You stop explaining. Stop defending. You just exist. Fully. Fiercely. Finally. One evening, I walked past a mirror and caught my reflection. Hair messy, sweatshirt stained, tired eyes. And I smiled. Not because I looked perfect, but because I looked like someone who had been through hell and never let it change her name. Jason may never understand what he lost. He may spend the rest of his life spinning a story where he's the victim of an angry woman with a file folder. Let him sit in the fiction, because I live in the truth, and the truth is I wasn't destroyed. I was delivered, not to some fantasy life, but to the one I built with my own hands, one document at a time. And every time I see Isla chasing sunlight in the backyard, or hear her laugh echo down the hallway, I remember that check didn't set me free. That verdict didn't heal me. I did. I saved myself.